Well, alright, I had to take a peek under the hood and see what's going on there, so I'm going to go ahead and go through what I see here, as well as maybe how a compressor works from start to finish as related to this one. What I found interesting when I pulled the shroud off, first and foremost, there's a capacitor right here. Don't get into this. Unplug it before you pull the shroud off. Take a jumper wire and go from one side to the other and make sure that this thing is dead. You may get a snap. But don't get into that with your fingers before verifying it is dead, or you may get shocked. But what I find interesting is there's a cooling fan right here, which I expected to see. And it is keyed on the shaft on a flat, and it does have a snap ring on it, so unless it breaks, it shouldn't get off there or loosen up in any way. But the motor, the back of the motor itself is wide open. I can see the armature down in there, which I find very interesting. So any air that is being pushed through the shroud down across to cool the fins and everything up there, if you're in a dusty environment, wood shop, whatever, it's going to send that all down into the motor as well. So my recommendation periodically would be to remove the shroud after letting the tank fill up, and then get in here with compressed air and blow that out, and it should help make it run and last a lot longer. There is some form of a bearing down in this end, which looks like a good candidate to replace later if it goes bad. Okay, well, I just wanted to give a general idea on how an air compressor actually works. They're pretty fascinating devices. A lot of people may not know or have any interest, but I'm going to throw it in here nonetheless. It is unplugged, but it all starts right here. Once you plug it in and apply power to it, and let's say it has no pressure in the tank, and you flip the on switch, this contactor would close, and I have pressure in it, so it's not closing right now, but I'm going to force it to close. Now it's running. It has completed the switch across these wires, and now the motor is running. This is the pressure switch. There is a cut in and a cut out pressure. As it's running right now, there's going to be a cutout pressure of, let's say, 125 pounds. It's going to be one of these two. They're covered with hot glue, but there'll be an adjustment right here and another one right here, which you can see. My assumption is this one is the cut out and this one is the cut in. Underneath this pressure switch there's a diaphragm, and this is connected directly to the tank. So as the tank pressure builds, it's building and building and pushing on that diaphragm, and once that diaphragm reaches whatever pressure it's set at, it will raise this contactor back up. And when it does that, it does a couple of things. It kills the power to the motor, so the motor stops turning. This is the valve I was speaking of right here, the unloader. There is a pin that's sticking down under this onto a metal arm that's sticking out. So as it raises and raises, as it kills the power, it also presses a piston in this unloader and it releases the pressure off the head. So the next time it goes to start, it doesn't have any pressure and the motor can turn freely to bring it up to speed. Now the cut-in pressure is the exact same thing, it's just a different adjustment. As that diaphragm starts collapsing and falling down, you can turn, let's say it's this one, to say, okay, we've fallen so far, now we're at 90 pounds, start back up. So that's the way a pressure switch works. So as it's generating, it's pulling intake right here, it's pulling air in, it's running through a compression cycle, and there's some reed valves in here. It'll let the air in, and when it goes to compress, it'll shut the reed valve, and it'll force the air out the outlet over here. Now the outlet runs down and around to right here, and this goes into the tank. But it is not just fed directly into the tank. Right here is a check valve. So as that compressed air gets put in, it cannot come back out. So it's building that pressure, and that keeps all the head pressure constant up here, and it doesn't allow 120 pounds or 125 on the head. It's compressing it in here, and then there it is. It tees off to the unloader right here. So once it comes up to pressure, and let's say it's set at 125 like this one, all this stuff is happening at the same time. It's snapping this shut, it's in turn opening the unloader, it's releasing pressure from here, or in essence out of this pipe, but since there's a check valve here, none of the tank pressure can get back up this way. So that's in essence in a rundown how an air compressor works. Now, there is a gauge right here for tank pressure. It shuts off at 125 like I'd noted. This is your regulator. This is how much you want to come out in terms of pressure. So you can turn this up, turn this down if you want 40, whatever, and that's what this gauge is for. This obviously is where you hook up whatever you're going to hook up. Now there is a, which I hadn't noted yet, a reset button right here. And this may be a thermally protected switch here, or when it draws too many amps, then it'll snap this open, and if it doesn't start again, that's the first place. I thought it was interesting that in the manual, when they speak about the break-in period, they don't mention changing the oil shortly thereafter. It's actually many pages back. They've got a note to change it after the first hour of use to remove any debris. So this step right here should be footnoted over here. No big deal, but I went well beyond that. I forgot to take the oil with me so I could change it, so I ran all day without it. Alright, well, here is the oil fresh out of it. I'm going to try to shine a light in here and see if you can see what I see. There are some very, very fine suspended particles that look to be aluminum, maybe a little bit of cast iron in there. Nothing out of the ordinary. Now, I ran this thing today hard. It was probably churning for a good 6 or 7 hours. So I'm quite pleased with what little bit came out of here. No chunks, no nothing, exactly what I would expect to see. Good deal. While we're on the subject of oil, what to use, what weight, and what type, I typically use a 30 weight, which is what this machine calls for. This is a non-detergent compressor oil here, a Stay Lube CRC. I went to my supplier to get this, and they no longer carry it anymore. So I actually had to go with the Central Pneumatic from Harbor Freight. It was about $7, applied a coupon, whatever. It doesn't say what weight this is, but it feels a little bit lighter than this 30 weight here. But if you live in a very, very cold climate, or if your winters get really, really cold and your compressor's out where it'll be, let's say, below 40 degrees for extended periods of time, you want to switch over to a 10 weight, a straight 10 non-detergent oil. Don't use like dual weight like 1040, 1030 or anything like that. Just use a straight 10 or a straight 30 and everything should work just fine. My recommendation on using synthetics, and the store I went to tried to peddle me on a synthetic oil, and I said, no thanks. You don't typically want to use a synthetic for breaking in an engine or something like this. That stuff is so slick and it reduces so much friction. The rings may not seat in properly, the internals may not seat in properly, so I would highly recommend going with standard dyno oil for at least a while. You know, this should do about 3 or 4 changes right here. So just buy one of these, change it periodically, and if you want to switch over to synthetic later, then that would be a good time to do it. Alright, I'm going to speak just a little bit in general terms about understanding cubic feet per minute. Now there's different standards out there. There's CFM, there's SCFM, which is a standard cubic feet per minute, which is based on a set of parameters, and then there's actual cubic feet per minute. You can look all this up on your own, but in generality, I'm just going to speak about cubic feet per minute. Now, a compressor will have a rating on it. It'll say X cubic feet per minute at X PSI. That's pounds per square inch. Let's say in the example of this particular compressor, it puts out 5.7 cubic feet per minute at a 40-pound pressure. And it does 4.7 CFM at 90 PSI. So basically what that means is as it's building up that pressure in the tank, it's really outputting a little bit less, from 5.7 to 4.7, or in this case 1 CFM per minute, 1 cubic foot, that volume of air. So how do you select a compressor when you're looking at these things? You know, a lot of people might have a tendency to look at horsepower and go, wow, it's a 2.5 or it's a 5 or whatnot. To me, that's irrelevant. The important figure here is the cubic feet per minute that it will produce. And the reason that that is the most important to me is the tool that you hook up to it. It could be a sprayer, HVLP, LVLP. It could be an impact wrench, an air ratchet, a DA sander, just all these different air tools, these pneumatic tools that you would supply the power to them via the air. That is important to me. So it's difficult to say how big of a compressor do I need. Well, the obvious answer is the bigger the better, because it can drive everything. But someone just wanting to fill up toys or their car tires or whatnot, they don't need a 60 or an 80 gallon 5 horsepower 2-stage compressor to do that. Someone who is painting full automobiles, entire cars, they need a large volume of air and they need a lot of CFMs to drive the tool so they can maintain the work uninterrupted. So when you look at the tool requirement, you have to balance it out to the compressor, especially if you're buying both components at the same time. So for example, in this case, if I had a tool that was rated at 8 CFM that it wanted at 40 PSI, and this particular compressor can only output 5.7 at 40 PSI, I'm not going to be able to use the tool very long at all until the compressor kicks on. And when that compressor kicks on, it's not going to be able to keep up with my output or what I'm requiring. So the tank pressure is going to continuously drop down, and the compressor cannot keep up. So when the tool starts running down, you have to stop and wait, let the compressor build back up, and then you can go again. You're not going to take a small compressor like this and use an air hog 1/2-inch impact gun and rotate your tires. You might get one tire off, and then you'll have to let it build up and then work on the next one. So if you wanted to balance out to 0, or to where the compressor just keeps up, if it would output 5.7 CFMs at 40 PSI, and you had a tool that was rated dead on that, 5.7 CFM at 40 PSI, you'll get continuous use out of that. Now the compressor will constantly be running. After it depletes the tank down to where it kicks on, it'll run 24/7 as long as you're using the tool with the exact match CFM. So ideally, if you're running something at 5.7 CFM, you want 7 or 8 or 9 or even better on your compressor. So once it gets down to the cut-in point, the compressor is actually going to cycle itself because it can deliver more than what you're using. It's kind of confusing, and I hope that kind of makes sense, but in generality, that's how you need to kind of size your compressor. Now on this particular compressor, I know that it cannot keep up if I was on my HVLP gun constantly on the trigger. But in my case, I know that I'm doing a little panel or a door, and then while I'm rotating them out to set up for the next one, the compressor is building itself back up and cycling itself off. So in my application, I'm making it work. You can do most anything you would want with any air tool, because you're going to have a supply of pressure in the tank. The larger the tank, the longer you can get by until the compressor actually kicks on. Very confusing, but think about that. Do a little bit of homework.